Hunter Biden has agreed to a plea deal following a federal investigation. He has agreed to enter guilty pleas on 2 misdemeanor tax charges and admit to felony gun possession. The president's son will avoid prosecution on the gun charge if he follows conditions set by prosecutors. A federal judge in Delaware must still approve the agreement. Multiple prominent Republicans have claimed the Justice Department went easy on him. Catherine Herridge, who is CBS News' chief investigative correspondent, joins us now. Catherine, today you spoke to the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, and I wonder how this plea agreement impacts his ongoing investigations into the Biden family.
Great question. A short time ago, we spoke with the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He's been running these investigations into the Biden family business dealings with entities overseas. He told CBS News he's disappointed with this plea agreement, given that it only involves 2 tax misdemeanors.
My first question is, what has the Department of Justice been doing investigating this for the last 6 or 7 years? We all knew he didn't pay his taxes for 2 specific years. But what we've uncovered would suggest money laundering, would suggest tax evasion, would suggest racketeering, many serious crimes, including not being a registered foreign agent. So we're very disappointed in the Department of Justice. We think this is another example of a 2-tier system of justice in America.
In response to the Republican committee's interim findings, a White House spokesman said they've shown no evidence of wrongdoing by then Vice President Joe Biden.
And is there anything else you can tell us about what they plan to do moving forward?
Great question. We asked the chairman of the committee whether this changes the scope and the trajectory of their investigation. And he told CBS News that one of his immediate plans is to call the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss, to Capitol Hill to testify and explain the status of that probe. As chairman, will you call the U.S. Attorney in Delaware to testify?
I think that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware will either testify in front of the House Oversight Committee or the Judiciary Committee. He needs to explain whether or not his investigation is concluded, or as he put in that statement when he says the investigation is ongoing, he needs to be transparent with congressional investigators as to what exactly he's investigating moving forward.
And the reason all of that matters is that we had these 2 statements from the different teams. Hunter Biden's legal team said it's their understanding that this years-long probe into the president's son has been resolved. But the U.S. Attorney David Weiss put out his own statement that said simply this investigation is ongoing,
So there is even discrepancy about
Correct.
The end result here.
Correct.
Okay, well, we will continue to follow it. I know you will. Thank you very much, Catherine. And for more on this, I want to bring in Nikole Killion and Nancy Cordes. They join us right now. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent, and Nancy is CBS News' chief White House correspondent. Nancy, I want to start with you because the president did speak about this for the first time since we learned about his son's plea agreement. No surprise that it was short.
I'm very proud of my son.
He has been so careful about wanting to draw a separation between anything having to do with the White House and the Justice Department. He is also a staunch defender of any family member. So what do you make of what President Biden said today?
Well, Weijia, he uttered exactly 6 words. I'm very proud of my son. And he did that here in San Francisco a short time ago in response to a barrage of questions from reporters who wanted to get his take on this plea agreement as he spoke at an AI-themed event here in San Francisco. And all he would say is that he's proud of his son, and that was it. And frankly, that's all we expect to hear from him in the near future. He has been, as you pointed out, so careful when talking about this issue for a number of reasons, chiefly that he doesn't want to inject it into the bloodstream any more than it already is. He doesn't want to get into a tit for tat with Republicans over his own son, and he doesn't want to appear to be trying to influence the Department of Justice investigating his son. So for all of those reasons, he has really remained mum. He put out a very terse statement this morning saying that he's proud of his son and then reiterated that in person. And now he's off conducting fundraisers here in the Bay Area. And for now, unless he is pressed again, that's all we're going to hear from him about it.
And Nikole, of course, Republicans were quick to say that it's actually impossible to separate who Hunter Biden is with his plea agreement. They are calling this a sweetheart deal. And I know that you spoke with Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, today about that. Can you tell us more about what he had to say?
Yeah, that's right, Weija. Well, Speaker McCarthy did characterize this as a sweetheart deal for Hunter Biden. He continued to talk about the same thing that Chairman Comer talked about, that he feels that this is a two-tiered justice system. But I asked him, how does he explain that, considering the attorney overseeing this case against Hunter Biden was actually a Trump appointee? Take a listen.
What you see is, if you are the lead candidate against the current president, you get indicted, but there's jail time proposed. Here you are, the son of the president. We watched other Americans with some of these same judgments or these same challenges they had before them, that they would have jail time.
Now, the speaker says that this plea agreement raises more questions and said that House Republicans will continue to follow the facts where they lead. He also says that because Hunter Biden has now pleaded guilty, he feels that the Justice Department should turn over more information with respect to this probe, something Chairman Comer is also pursuing.
Of course, Hunter Biden's team is drawing a very different picture, and his lawyer spoke out earlier today during an interview to sort of lay out exactly where the president's son is. Let's take a listen. And Nancy, I want to chat with you on the other side.
Mr. Biden had a period in his life that was troubled, where, it's very clear he didn't timely pay the taxes he was supposed to pay at the time. He subsequently has paid them, but he didn't timely pay them. I think it's a very hard question whether I would have been prosecuted for that or not. And I think I could have been, but I think that's a hard question, and it's one I can't answer.
And Nancy, we've heard from other Democrats, too, saying that, well, at least Hunter Biden is acknowledging wrongdoing, taking responsibility for it. Do you anticipate that's going to be part of their messaging when they are, hammered with how this all played out?
Right. I think that they'll try to talk about it in general as little as possible, unless they are put on the spot by events like they have been today. And they're going to try to push back when they do on this narrative that Republicans have been putting forth, as you heard Speaker McCarthy in his conversation with Nikole, this argument that somehow Hunter Biden is getting a leg up or is being given favorable treatment because he is the son of the president. Well, Democrats are going to try to turn that on its head and say, wait a minute, these misdemeanors that he's accused of, if some ordinary Joe Schmo had failed to pay their taxes, maybe they wouldn't have been pursued by DOJ at all. So in their view, Hunter Biden is not getting special treatment. And this is not over because, as you've been discussing, the U.S. attorney in charge of this case has said that the investigation goes on. So the question is, are there additional charges coming down the road? Today, Hunter Biden's lawyer said he doesn't anticipate that he wouldn't have cut this deal if he thought more charges were coming. But until the U.S. attorney says case closed, then it's open as far as we know.
Nikole, of course, if you were to ask Speaker McCarthy about it, he would say that certainly there ought to be more charges. And I want to ask you about what he said earlier, essentially saying that, there are two separate standards for the former president, who's the Republican frontrunner, and the current president's son. But in order to make that argument, the premise is that the potential penalties are the same, that the charges are somehow equal. Did he address this at all and talk about, the Trump charges with you?
He did to a certain extent, because I did ask him to react to this interview that has been airing with the former president and Fox News host Bret Baier that's gotten a lot of attention as of late, with the second part, of course, airing today. But of course, we heard the former president defend his actions and his handling of classified documents, saying that he had golf clothes and shoes mixed into some of these boxes, that he didn't have time to go through them. And so I asked the speaker if that was an acceptable response.
I do believe this could have been handled so differently in the process of where it's going now. But to think what the rest of the world is seeing that one president that has documents all the way back to being a senator, his Department of Justice is indicting.
But do you buy the former
one,
president's explanation?
Look, they can talk and they can sit down and look all the way through, but the one thing I know is the current president's Department of Justice is indicting the person that is the #1 person running against you for office.
So the speaker remains very critical when it comes to President Biden and his handling of classified documents, and noting that this dates back to his time in the Senate. But when it comes to former President Trump, he has been reticent to outwardly criticize him, instead turning this back on the situation involving President Biden. While he says he thinks the situation should be handled differently, he more seems to be implying that the investigation should have been handled differently. So again, the speaker, of course, continuing to defend the former president for now.
All right, Nikole, Killion, and Nancy Cordes, thank you very much. Nancy, safe travels back from San Francisco, where you are, of course, traveling with President Biden.